Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. This week we have a Q&A. We went through 3 weeks of periodization and programming talk, and now we're leaving it up to the viewers and the audience to ask us any questions, really pinpointing the fact that we did a shitty job of spending 3 weeks describing stuff and have a lot of holes to fill. So, Paul, how you doing?
Doing well, man. Really enjoying a nice weekend.
Excellent, excellent. How's the weather in Canada? Is it like actually officially springtime now?
Yeah, it's been quite warm, and then we had a few cold days in a row, and then we're back up into I think today was about 70 Fahrenheit and sunny.
Oh,
I actually
nice.
spent the afternoon by the pool. Kind of nice.
What do they have? So have they eased up anything yet on?
No,
No.
no. June 2nd, they're supposed to ease up a few things, allow outdoor dining and a few other things. And then every 2 to 3 weeks, they're going to start phasing things in, and they're expected to be normal-ish by August.
Man, what a drastic difference. Like you never really understand the differences of like how other countries run things, but now that Canada is like so close to us, you guys are neighbors, so it's like we would never think that there would be such a difference. Like when I went to Iraq, it was like very eye-opening, the difference in everything, right? But when you have like a Canada where it's like just your little brother, um, and then they're just like so far behind on how they're doing things, it seems like you guys are miles and miles away instead of the border across. It's interesting.
Yeah, there was a lot of dropped balls politically in terms of how to handle this, and we're going to be feeling this for 10 years
So
minimum
you're saying
in
that you
terms of
guys had someone worse than Trump running your country?
our prime minister. His background is he's a drama teacher. But
Okay.
his father was a prime minister, and his father was a horrible prime minister.
So he
He's
got
our
your prime
our prime
minister got
minister is a joke.
legacied.
Our prime minister would, like, if we were on a playground, he'd be the kid hanging from a tree by his underpants.
Are you right now feeling any hint of desire to take your shirt off because me and Justin are in tank tops right now? I know how jealous you
I
get when other
literally,
men are in tank
I
tops.
yeah, I will if you want me to. I was just by the pool tanning, so I've got a great tan. All right, too.
Oh, he was a boxing celebrity? What does that mean, Blaine? Oh,
Do you remember that old
Jesus.
celebrity boxing matchups? He was in that
Yeah.
too.
Was he
Yeah.
He
really?
was in one. Yeah.
How'd you get, how'd you, do you vote for your prime minister?
I didn't
Some
vote for
people
him,
do.
no.
But you do. You guys vote.
Oh yeah.
So you guys are more fucked up than we are. We voted Donald Trump in, but you guys voted that guy in. That's way worse.
Well, Canada's a very liberal country, so he was the Liberal Party. We had a conservative government before that didn't do a great job, so people wanted change, and he came in and
I have a hard
did
time
nothing.
finding that these candidates that we get, like, this is the best of the best. This is the cream of the crop, and it's not looking very good for everyone.
Yeah, I think to think about a 32 million people, this pushover. I'm trying really hard not to swear, but like, he's bad.
Oh man, that is rough. So I'm doing some research on a project, trying to write a book. It's very difficult one to do, but
Mhm.
one of the things that I was looking at is this idea of pursuing a passion, and kind of the idea of that being predicated so much in terms of people being able to live a fulfilling life. If you choose your passion, you'll never have to work a day in your life. And one, what do you think about that saying? Because some of the research I'm reading is very interesting when it comes to pursuing your passion versus people who just persevere through certain things and it eventually becomes their passion?
It's funny you mentioned that because I've actually been thinking a lot about that in the last 2 months. So since I quit my full-time job and have been devoted purely to things that I absolutely love, right? Like I love coaching, I love Coach's Corner, I love the little things I've been doing. But I told myself that for 2 months I wouldn't take on any additional projects or any additional work. I would just do my Coach's Corner stuff and do my coaching, no additional clients, nothing. I was enjoying my time for about 2 weeks, and then for the last month and a half, I've been overwhelmingly miserable. And I'm and I mean that in like I mean that in the genuine sense. Like I've actually not been happy. And because even though I am pursuing a passion, I felt stagnant. I haven't felt like I've had any drive. The inertia within my life has been so heavy for me to just do stuff. And there have been a couple like life events during that time that have affected me, but in general, it's because I haven't felt like I've been pursuing more and demanding more of myself. And you and I have talked about this in the past, I think on a past podcast, about like being content with every moment, but also pursuing more and having a balance of the two. But I genuinely felt like I could be doing so much more, and for the first time in my life, it was not because of this feeling of like you're trash, you have to do more, or like you're not doing enough, so you have to do more to achieve more. It's more of a I can be better, so I want to be better, more from a positive place. But the amount of fulfillment that I get in each little moment or each little victory along that way, because I'm choosing things I'm passionate about, the highs are so much higher. And I couldn't imagine at any point putting my brain on a shelf, like trudging through a day of like trudging through an 8-hour day simply to earn 2 days on the weekend. You know what I mean? So that makes total sense. The fact that people who are pursuing their passions are more fulfilled. That being said, there's a lot of jobs in this life that are just like, I'm sure there are people who are passionate about cleaning toilets, but maybe that's a job for that person that they just tolerate. You know what I mean? Like who decides that they have the opportunity to pursue a passion, or who accepts that they don't and never takes that opportunity or never makes that opportunity?
Yeah, interesting, because it's kind of the opposite from what I've read, right? The idea that Cal Newport talks about this in So Good, They Can't Ignore You, where he pretty much says that if you can find a job that you somewhat enjoy doing, the goal shouldn't necessarily be to pursue your passion, because so many people pursue their passions, and once that becomes their job, it becomes conflicted with them and it no longer is their passion, because understanding that owning your own business is more than just being a trainer or pursuing a passion, right? Once you own a gym, once you do other stuff where it's relying on you to create that income, you're far more than just the coach, right? And his thing was saying that, you know, instead of pursuing your passion and telling people to pursue their passion, find a job that you enjoy doing and devote so much time and effort into it. Like it's the idea of enjoying creating a purpose within your job more so than trying to pursue your passion. And then by creating that purpose within your job, you'll learn to make it a passion for you. Almost like with lifting, right? You enjoy the process more than you enjoy the competition, is kind of the mindset that he's going with in that term, right? Find a job that, you know, say you're just really good at something, right? And you go to school and you just pick it up super fast and other people have a hard time with it, but maybe your passion is a musical instrument, right? But instead of pursuing trying to create music and create a band, which who knows if that's going to work out, he's saying take the thing that you're really good at, pursue that, and it'll eventually turn into a passion, or to at least fuel your ability to do music on the side and not have to turn that passion into something that is financially responsible for your upkeep and your security and all that other stuff.
I totally see that. So when I was still coaching at the college level, I couldn't train as hard as I want to, and I actually didn't enjoy my training as much. And then as soon as I quit coaching full time, my training and my numbers took off like crazy.
Yeah.
And it's because my passion for lifting had become my job. But one thing that I have actually been able to do is I've cultivated, and because I knew that was coming, I knew, having gone through that experience, that I was like, okay, if I'm going to go into coaching again, I still need to enjoy my lifting. So how do I do that? And so the way I've organized my business is I only do the stuff that I'm really good at and that I really like doing. The stuff that I am not good at and that take away from my ability to have fun, I outsource and pay somebody. Right up, I'm like, I'm not going to do it. I would rather make less money net than do these things that I don't enjoy, because it's going to take away from my quality of life.
Yeah.
And that it's been a huge game changer for me. And also having more variety, right? Like having the variety of Coach's Corner presentations and these types of conversations, and having, which I'm passionate about, and having the passion about coaching and the working one-on-one with clients. That variety has been a big game changer. That what you're saying makes total sense though, because I couldn't, when I was coaching in person all day, man, the last thing I wanted to do was lift. I did it, but it was not to the quality that I would have wanted. You know,
Yeah.
I'm sure when you were a gym owner, your training sucked.
I would have to go to it. Yeah. There would be times where I went to other gyms, or I was lucky to have a good training partner that kind of kept me in check. Like I showed up to train knowing that I had to bring my best because he was infinitely better. So I valued his training more than mine. So when I showed up, I knew like, hey, if I had a good training day, then he'll have a good training day, and his training is more important than mine, is the way I looked at it. So it definitely eased that up. But the first gym I owned, I definitely had that issue where I got to the point where I went to the gym. I didn't even train. I went to like an LA Fitness to train, and I barely could even make it to work at the gym. And I got to the point where I was working like 6 hours a week, and I still hated every minute of it. And I just got so drained from that being the business, and that being the entity of my financial stability. And ever since then, I've made it a purpose to not deliberately be such an integral part of the business, not to be a face of the business, so that when I do pull myself away, it's not a financial struggle as well. Because that happened at the original gym that I was at. I did everything. I ran the boot camp classes. I did group training. I did all the strongmen, all the athletes. And then as soon as I was like, hey, I got somebody coming in to run the business, they're going to manage the gym, production and clients went down like 40% automatically, because it wasn't me delivering the training anymore. So I've always made sure to keep myself as distant from that. You know, the ego tells you, hey, be the face of this company. But in my heart of hearts, I knew that being the face of a company is not necessarily what I want, not necessarily what drives me. So I never really focused on that at all.
Well, it'd also be bad for marketing because you're ugly.
Oh, that's not nice, man. This is live. Can't believe you would say that live, especially with my girlfriend on the call. You're so rude.
Is she?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Emma.
God. So rude. Anyways, way to derail the conversation. First, you talk about, fried chicken last week, and now you want to talk about me being ugly. You're on a roll here, big guy.
I know.
I can tell Canada's really, really getting the.
Emma has a question.
Go ahead, Emma.
I don't know how. I have no idea how.
You just asked. You're on. You're live.
Oh, I didn't know I was live. I just wanted to disagree with Paul. I think you're very attractive, even with the black eye and the bloody knuckles. And you know how I feel about those.
There you go.
All right, I'm proven wrong.
Well, of course you are, because you're not that smart.
Yeah, that's true.
See, I can do it too. I can do this all day.
Hey,
I'm from the East Coast, buddy. You're Canada. You're too nice. You're eventually going to tap out and be like, yeah, I didn't mean anything I said, Tony. I'm so sorry.
Hey, man. That thing you're still working on, I got 2 of them.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Your master's degree, I got 2 of them.
Oh, yeah, but I'm actually going to do something with mine.
Yeah, that's true. I did not do anything with mine.
What's your other master's degree in?
In
Oh, that's a really good one.
no. It's a sports management master's. Like that's my major is sports management, but it's instructional leadership, I believe.
Oh, and did
Institutional
they
leadership.
teach you to put people down in that and
To assert dominance?
Oh, okay. So you were more in that German sports management position.
Yeah.
More of that dictatorship. I like that. I like that. Did they show like Full Metal Jacket first day of class?
No, but Mein Kampf was one of our required readings.
Nice. Mein Kampf and Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Oh, great. So yeah, so just going into that like research of building perseverance and being able to do the things that you have to do and like stick with it usually lends itself to people who are more successful over life, right? It's that long-term perseverance. And sometimes when you're pursuing your passion, there's a big disconnect there between being able to persevere through something that you think is your passion and then being able to persevere through something that you're actually really good at. Like what are you more naturally inclined to put more of your effort into, right? Something that you're like really, really good at, or maybe like something that you think is your passion, but it's always a hard thing and you struggle with it all the time, right? And that's the thing I always think about is like, I love physics, but fuck if I'm going to read a physics book and like create that as my passion. There's no way I'm going to do that. I just happen to be like really good at exercise science and nutrition, where when I heard stuff, it clicked and I immediately retained it. And it just made sense. Like, this is what I'm going to pursue. But I have other things like psychology, philosophy, and stuff like that that are way harder for me, but maybe more of a passion for me. But it's like, what, how do you define what you should be pursuing as your career? And it's the thing that allows you to create long-term growth potential. The people that work really hard but they jump from job to job are less successful in the long run and less successful and less happy in life as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, so interesting stuff. If you guys are interested in any of that research, a lot of it came from Angela Duckworth, who wrote the book Grit. If you guys have not read that book, it's a really good book. And then Cal Newport, So Good They Can't Ignore You is the other book where they talk about pursuit of getting really good at something over pursuit of passion. So cool. Q&A, all right? If you guys have anything that comes up based off of this interaction, feel free to just raise your hand. We'll unmute you and you can chime in with any other things that you have. So Andrew's first up, tips on how to track overall volume in a program week to week. How much is too much? So how much is too much is going to be impossible to answer, right? Because there's so much inter-individuality. What is too much for some person is going to be not enough for the other. And what is perfect amount for this person, this block may be different next block, right? Maybe, it's the summertime and they want to go hiking more. So then you're going to have to lower their leg volume because that hiking is going to debilitate their ability to recover from their training. So that's a very nuanced question. If you have anything like super, super specific, feel free to ask that. But overall, tracking volume is something that you want to think about in terms of, are you able to progress week to week from that volume that you've adapted to the week before, right? So if you're doing 12 sets of upper body movements, say pressing movements, 12 sets a week of like 12 really hard sets. And then next week you stay with those same 12 sets, but you're able to add either reps to those sets or add a little bit of weight to those sets, then that tells you that that volume in and of itself is something that's driving progression. It's creating enough stress that the body has to adapt to it, and then it's able to progress. If you couldn't add those set or those reps and you couldn't add extra weight, then that's telling you that you're not recovering from that session. So it's allowing you to know if this is the paradigm that I'm basing my progressions off of, and the ability to get better is either I can lift more weight or I can do more reps. Then week to week, if you keep that volume set distribution the same, you should be able to make those progresses every single time, right? And then if you don't, then you can either look at what are some of the lifestyle factors that could be affecting this volume. Because if it worked in week 1, why wouldn't it work in week 6? What's going on in week 6, right? Because the idea is like if fatigue accumulates over time, which it doesn't really too much, right? Physiologically, it doesn't, right? But mentally, it may. What's the thing that's causing this person to not be able to progress? Is it sleep? Is it lack of motivation? And a lot of people attribute lack of motivation to needing a deload, and they call that fatigue. And it's like, well, your muscles aren't fatigued, right? So how can you keep that person entertained going into the gym so that they're able to go to the gym and perform at a high level every single time? That's what we talked about. One of the benefits of conjugate. If you're going to the gym every week and you have a different variation that you're trying to give it your best, you're going to be excited to go all the time if you like lifting heavy, right? So that's always going to drive you to continue to train, and then you don't need to deload as often. So once you have that set distribution of like, these are the amount of sets that this person progresses on, then I would think about adding load, right? Because we're powerlifters first. So load's going to be the most important thing. If they're bodybuilders, maybe reps would be more important. And then from there, you just continue to progress and progress and progress. And then, because typically once they have that maximum adaptive volume, then there's really no need to add more sets to that person, right? So then the hard thing is like defining that baseline, right? And if you look at the literature, that baseline can be anywhere from like 8 hard working sets to 16 hard working sets based off of the reviews that Greg Nuckols and James Krieger have done. And those are kind of the 2 guys that are known for statistical reviews. So I would always start someone around that 8 to 10 set, that lowest set rep range or threshold, and then see how they progress. If they're really strong and they're really big, they're probably going to be on that lower set paradigm the entire time. If there's someone who's more fit or maybe not as strong, or, yeah, those are the 2 things. You can say female, but that's just because females aren't as strong as males is the biggest reason why they can do more volume. If you look at like stress components and the things that can debilitate females, the idea that they can handle more volume within a training session at higher intensities is true. The idea that they can handle more stress through training is not true. They actually get burnt out a lot faster. They get more hormonal downregulation. So people that are perpetuating this idea that women can handle more volume is like, yeah, within that workout they can, but within the training block, they're definitely going to have more destructive negative effects for handling more volume over time. Go ahead, Paul.
I agree with everything you said.
In
terms of tracking, there you go. In terms of tracking volume, so Tony talked a lot about the total number of sets. For looking at hypertrophy volume, that's really effective, because you know that if you're taking the sets, on a hypertrophy exercise, quote unquote, you're getting at least 3 or 4 effective reps per set. So you could track your number of effective reps. So if you're looking at, and that will also help you look at how intense each set is. So if you're taking a set to failure, you have your 3, 2, 1, 0 reps in reserve repetition, so 4. Then if you're taking it beyond failure, every effective rep after that counts towards your total number of effective reps per week. And so that's one way you could look at it. When we're looking at building strength and we're working, let's say above that 80% threshold, there's often a question of how much work is required to get motor learning, how much work is required to get the skill acquisition. And that's, again, going to be very individual. So what I do is I'll start quite low and then increase up. Keep in mind that as you increase the number of sets, you're increasing the number of the amount of tonnage being lifted by the lifter within a session or within a week. And that's personally something that I look to track, is like, how much tonnage of squatting are we doing? How much tonnage of benching, deadlifting are we doing? Am I seeing that as the tonnage on squat goes down, the amount of deadlift tonnage that's tolerated goes down, or sorry, the amount of squatting goes up, the amount of deadlifting goes down, those types of relationships is what I'm looking at. When you're looking at those strength-based movements, although Prelipin's chart is quite antiquated, it can give you a good idea of where you're at, right? If you're the ranges that it gives are super wide, and it can kind of let you know, hey, where am I within this range? Most people tend to be right in the middle. For less experienced lifters, they're going to be towards the higher end of that range. And again, tracking volume when each set is not as like the rate of perceived exertion isn't as high. So, you know, your RPE 7 sets, your RPE 6 sets that are, you're not accumulating a lot of fatigue throughout the session. Like an RPE 6 set's probably not going to beat you up very much. You'll be able to do a ton of work afterwards. But say you go from doing like 3 sets at an RPE of 6 to 10 sets at an RPE of 6, but you're still accumulating work on the body. So that should be managed at some point. But as long as you have controls in place to have these metrics, and it doesn't need to be very like I don't want to use the word accurate, but you have to have some means of control. One thing that I'm working on right now is a spreadsheet calculator from my programming that allows me to calculate the load, the tonnage, so the load, the number of sets, the total tonnage, and the prescribed RPE, and then looking at what was actually performed by the lifter, and then giving me an index for how fatigued how they're rating between actual and prescribed, to give me an indication of whether they're ahead of pace or behind the 8 ball. And that's ideally what I'm going to be using moving forward. That's something that I'm working on right now, within that paradigm of tracking volume, tracking intensity, and putting them together and looking at, you know, quote unquote fatigue ratio of the individual.
Do you have any follow-ups to that, Andrew, or is that good? All right. So next question, thoughts on snatch grip deadlift instead of deficit as an accessory to build leg drive in the deadlift. What do you got, Paul?
I wouldn't use it as an accessory to build leg drive in the deadlift, simply because it pushes your hips further back away from the bar. An accessory that would improve your leg drive, you'd want to be having some more anterior knee travel. So that's why I would prefer a deficit or a trap bar deadlift, like a low handle trap bar deadlift, to improve leg drive. Snatch grip for me is a lift to teach tension in the lats and to feel that integration between lat and hip, pulling the hips forward. So I think it's a bit of a misattribution of intent there.
Yeah, and even with deficits, right, to build leg drive, I haven't found that to be the greatest carryover for that, right? Everyone will always say, you know, oh, I get great leg drive off a deficit. And they'll always say something about, what are you doing, man?
I'm cold.
Oh, you poor thing. Where's your
my nipples are hard. Leave me alone.
Where's your pug, the Snuggie?
Okay, first of all, it's a French bulldog. Second of all, not in my house.
But yeah, I have so many clients, if I give them deficit deadlifts, right? They think deficit deadlifts are built to help you improve getting the bar off the ground, which I have not found deficit deadlifts to help improve that at all. I've seen that help actually improve their lockout tremendously over that. So, but then I'll always hear things like, I get such good leg drive on a deficit, but it never transfers to when I pull the mats out, even if it's like a 1-inch deficit. So it's like, does that actually have any transferability to your actual lift? For some people it may. For me, the majority of them, it doesn't, right? So you have to make sure that you're not falling in love with the idea of when people tell you this exercise does X, Y, and Z, that may be true for them, but that may be misappropriated for 80% of the regular population. Much like when people say front squats to build up your quads, it's like, well, does it, right? If you do a front squat and your knees don't travel forward, you're probably not getting as much quad development as you would if you had a, heel elevated like high bar squat where your knees travel forward, right? Understanding the mechanisms of action and what's actually doing the work and how that can actually be dynamically correspondent to your main movements is the thing that matters the most, right? So will deficit deadlifts build leg drive? Maybe, but so would leg press, right? So would split squats. So would anything where you're driving your leg into the ground and contributing with both knee flexion to extension and hip flexion to extension, right? Those are going to be the things that help build that leg drive. You just have to find that exercise that clicks for you, that allows you to build those things in a uniform way to where it makes sense, right? So that's a big thing that I always see with people when it comes to like exercise selection. They pick exercises because this person said that this exercise works this, so that I just believe it wholeheartedly. And it's like, well, not all the time, man. Not it really depends on how you're built and morphology and whether or not you can actually transfer those things over.
To add to that too, you want to look at, like, this is a great example of performing the lift in the way it's meant to be performed. So I think a lot of the reason people think they get a ton of leg drive off a deficit is because they squat the bar.
Yeah.
So they try to sink their hips super low and they get into this, this position that mimics their deadlift 0%. Whereas if you were actually going to do a deficit deadlift and wedge the way that you would off the floor, you end up in a really high hip position, and which would overload the back, which is why it helps with lockout. So to me, improving speed off the floor in the deadlift is a function of how well can I maintain tension through my core, not have any power leaks, and then how fast can I develop force into the ground. None of that has anything to do with actually recruiting the quad more, in my opinion. So choosing lifts that challenge your tension in that bottom position, so things like low pause deadlifts, or even a pause deadlift from a deficit, so you're pausing the bar at the floor level, to me, that would teach you to be in a tighter position, and then you'd have less power leaks as you drive into the floor when you transfer that back into the deadlift. The other piece there is, like, as you mentioned, like, any lift that forces your legs to work hard is going to transfer to leg drive.
Right.
But if you can't keep your back tight, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. The idea is like, do you lack leg drive because your legs are weak, or do you lack leg drive because your technique's bad, right? And those are the two questions you should always ask yourself. Is it a technique thing or is it a muscular thing? And then once you have those answers, then you're able to pick the exercises that build on those answers, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things that people have a disconnect from, right? If it's a muscular thing, then we're going to do some hypertrophy maybe to grow those muscles. Maybe that'll create a better leverage for that person. Or maybe we'll focus on better exercises that lend themselves to better mind muscle connection, right? If you have somebody doing lat pull downs to grow their back and they never feel their back work, maybe we should try a different handle. Maybe we should try a different angle. Maybe we should try a bunch of different things until your back actually starts working, right? Try to find things within your deadlift that allows you to actually feel your legs working. And I think another issue too, right, is the perception of we need to be fast off the floor because the strongest guys are fast off the floor. And it's like, well, they're not trying to necessarily move the bar fast off the floor. They're just putting themselves in positions to where they can do it, because people that overly try end up rounding their backs and they're like, I'm super fast on the floor, but my lockout sucks. I need to work on my lockout. It's like, no, you need to work on your start position, because your start position is putting you in a shitty lockout position, right? It has nothing to do with your lockout. So I think those are some of the things that you have to, as a coach and an athlete, like distinguish what exactly are we trying to fix here.
100%.
All right. Best tips to periodize volume when training sessions need to be done in an hour. So I'd assume so you have not the best question, and no one on the audience actually asked this question, it was in Instagram. If you have a session in an hour and you need to get stuff done, does that necessarily change your program? And the answer would be, well, it can if you only have 3 days a week and you can only train an hour for those 3 days, your program will change. But if you can train 5 days a week, then maybe your program doesn't change. If you can train 6 days a week, maybe your program doesn't change. So you need to know whether or not you're being limited by the amount of days you can train and the time domain of your training, or if it's just a time domain thing. For this one, I'm going to assume it's both, because that's the only question that kind of makes sense, right? If it's not both and it's just one, if you can only train an hour a day, but you can train 6 days a week, your program just stays the same. You just give you more frequency, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if it is only an hour a day, then you need to prioritize, and your sport is powerlifting, you need to prioritize the competition list, right? Specificity, the SAID principle, right? You need to prioritize some type of, I would say, daily undulating periodization where you're getting optimal amount of work in within that 1 hour time frame. That's coined as density now, which is very popular. Density became very popular over the last 6 months. I don't know why, but
You're
it's been
welcome.
that was you?
I've been talking about density forever.
It's because you're so dense. You're like the Ronnie Coleman of powerlifting, of Canadian powerlifting.
I've heard that before. Yeah, I very much resemble him for sure.
More ways than one, yes. So yeah, trying to get as much density within that program as you can, right? So it may look like you're doing the main movement, and then from there you may be supersetting that with some type of mobility, some type of end range mobility movement for your upper body, so that when you do go into your upper body bench stuff right after that squat, then your upper body's ready to go. And then while you're doing the upper body stuff, right, then you may be supersetting that with some type of lower body exercise, right? So if you're prioritizing one lift like a squat, bench, or deadlift, within that priority, those don't necessarily get supersetted with something that's going to cause more fatigue. But if you do have something where you can bench press, right, that's your secondary movement or your tertiary movement, then you can start adding in things to allow fatigue to accumulate because you have only X amount of time to do it, right? So if squat's the main priority, you just squat, you get the most you can out of squat. While you're resting, you do some type of upper body mobility and get everything primed and ready to go for bench press. Once you're done with squat, bench press is next. And then you can do some type of bench, some type of lower body work, and then maybe finish it up with some type of stiff leg deadlift, right? And you're just doing 3 or 4 exercises and just trying to get the most you can out of them. And then the next program you go to, or the next day you go to, you just undulate the importance to maybe bench, lower body, right? And then upper body again. And then you just continue to do that cycle of making sure that each lift gets a day of importance. So if you're only training 3 days a week, it's gonna be squat, bench, deadlift. If you're training 4 days a week, squat, bench, deadlift, and then squat. And then you just keep that rotation going. But it's about trying to get as much as you can in, but not over fatiguing yourself to where your main movements don't actually get the quality of working as much as you can, right? Quality of work within your main movements, within your competition movements, are the most important thing when you have a short period of time. So don't sacrifice that quality just to try to get more work in. Kind of what you talked about before previously, right? It was like, if you're just accumulating volume with such a low RPE, that's not necessarily allowing you to get effective reps in. So then you're just accumulating junk volume. So you want everything to be as precise and high quality as possible with those main movements. What do you got, Paul?
The best tip, number one, the question is written in a way where you would dictate that volume is a means for progression. But as lifters, we know that, load is going to be more effective for us. And then if your goal is to do more volume, my best tip is to use a stopwatch.
That does help. Yeah.
Again,
it's underestimated.
You waste so much time. Like, I mean, I've started using a stopwatch for all my assistance work now. Like once I'm done my first 2 like big movements, stopwatch everything, no rest, not no rest, but very controlled rest and moving through. My sessions are much shorter, and I feel much more productive in them. Hasn't affected my numbers at all. Not only that, it'll help you maintain a certain level of fitness, and it'll bring a greater awareness to how much time you actually waste and how much time you actually have to do things. I really like the idea of supersetting or working in complexes of 2 to 3 exercises, maybe 2 output variations, and then 1 mobility or loaded mobility movement is a terrific way to do it, something that doesn't accumulate fatigue. But overall, I would say train in a way where you pick very meat and potatoes exercises, exercises that you connect well with, and that are going to help drive your ability to load the volume that you are doing rather than increasing volume for the sake of increasing volume.
Yeah. And, that's just kind of like the idea. It is a broad question. I mean, Kelly even brought up she has a person that trains 4 days a week, 60-minute sessions. 3 of those days are focused on main lifts, and then the 4th day is accessory. So there's so many ways you can like build that program, right? It's just making sure that you're optimizing your time and trying to create as much density within that program as possible. That stopwatch thing is such a great idea, because you just, like, if you're taking off weights, and I'm not very strong anymore, so I don't have to, I take off like 3 plates, but right, if you're strong, you're taking off like 6 plates on a squat, that's like, you can waste 5 to 10 minutes easily because you're just trying to like loaf a little bit. You're not, right? But if you have that stopwatch going like every 2 to 3 minutes, it moves a lot faster than you think.
Well, like I did that today. Like I was doing the secretive gym that I trained at today had a hack squat and a bear squat like connection. So like you could face the opposite way on the hack squat. And I'd never done that before. So I started like loading plates on it and doing warm-up sets. I'm like, well, I'm gonna have like 10 plates on this by the end of this. So I did my set, 10 plates, and then I moved on to my accessories. But in between every set of accessories, I just took off a couple plates, put them away, went back, did my accessory, came back, took off the plates. It's like that's an super easy way to save time.
Yeah.
Right? Doesn't have to be some fancy answer, which I feel like that question was looking for, some really nebulous answer of volume and intensity and blah blah blah. How about use a stopwatch and then superset your lifting with loading plates and unloading plates?
There you go. Easy enough. All right. Here goes Justin's dissertation, so bear with me. Along the lines of Andrew's question, because people can know who Andrew is, Justin, good job. How much merit can we give these statistics like weekly volume, etc., in terms of adjusting programming? If an athlete is progressing with a given weekly volume, then there is no need to change it unless outside factors change, right? Question mark. Example, more stress outside the gym so they can't handle more volume without it impeding recovery, etc., or stress outside the gym decreases so you could potentially increase volume slightly. So I think the question is, right, based on the amount of stress and recoverability of that athlete, should you adjust your weekly volume to meet their recovery capabilities, right? So if you have someone who has a stressful week, should you lower their volume for that week? And if somebody feels good the next week and it's not as stressful, should you add more volume? And I think that's just a little bit more complex than you want to make things, right? If you're training based on an RPE system, right? Whether or not they're fully recovered or not, their recoverability doesn't ever escalate much higher than its natural resources allows it to, right? So even if they're stressed, that doesn't necessarily mean they can't handle the same amount of sets per week. It may just mean that they can't handle the amount of load that they did the week before, or the amount of volume within repetitions that they did the week before, right? And that's kind of the way I look to gauge things. It's not so much, hey, you didn't make progress this week. It's more like, what are some of the lifestyle factors that didn't allow you to make progress this week because you were able to make progress last week, right? But if you're constantly undulating your periodization program based on their stress and trying to manage that on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, that's not necessarily allowing that lifter to RPE, to auto-regulate that training for that day. That's why you use RPEs, right? Because if they're doing an RPE 8 and their stress is high, they're just not going to be as strong. But then when they have a good day and their stress is low, then they're going to be able to lift a lot more weight. And that's going to allow for that volume to adjust on its own, right? If they're stronger that day, they've done more volume than they did last week when they weren't as strong. And then if they did have a good day, the next question I would ask as a coach is like, hey, what have you done differently this day, right? So let's say squats. Last week's squats, you underperformed based on your baseline and based on what you've been doing. This week, you performed very, very well. What are some of the things from last week to this week that has made the biggest difference in your ability to recover? And then you start asking those questions, and then you start building this box of like, hey, when I do this, this, and this, my training sessions are always better. So then they can start to build that focus of like, I need to get this, and these are non-negotiables if I want my training to be productive the next day. But just allowing them to have that RPE base will allow them to undulate that volumes very, very successfully, more so than you trying to undulate it based on predicting it, right? Like that's the whole problem with periodization. It's a predictive model, thinking that in week 1, this is where they are. So by week 6, this is where they should be if they follow the program exactly. It's like, that's not how the human body works, right? So you can't do that on a week-to-week basis either. You have to allow your lifters to build a sense of competency to do those things, to make those calls. What do you got, Paul?
So there's a few things that jump out. So like, in my opinion, so number one, I would like to clarify, we've used the term volume in a few different ways in this conversation. We've used it to discuss the total number of sets. We've used it to discuss the total number of effective repetitions. And then we've also used it to talk about tonnage. So when we look at volume, if you're using a static number of sets, the amount of volume is the total amount of weight lifted within the session. So in the example that you gave, which I love, is if you're using an RPE-based scale and you're not prepared for that day, your number of sets is static, your load isn't going to be as high, so all automatically you did less volume. Boom, problem solved. You did less volume because you couldn't accumulate, because you couldn't perform the way you wanted to. Then you look after the fact and say, what were my lifestyle factors? Which is great, terrific. That's a way of implementing controls. And that's all we're trying to do, is we're trying to implement controls to look at, should we make an adjustment? Well, in your instance, Tony, which I love, is the adjustment's made automatically. You don't have to think about it. But if you're using outside factors in the moment to say, okay, I was supposed to do X percentage for X amount of reps, I simply can't do that. Well, do you know you can't do it, or does it just feel shittier than it normally would, right? So that, to me, it's like, if you're making that decision in the moment, there's too much subjective playing a role for you to actually accurately say, I shouldn't do this next set because I'm going to fuck myself. Do you know that? I'm much bigger of like, if the session's written on paper and you're using that type of model, you do the session to the best of your abilities, and then you look back after the fact and say, why wasn't I able to perform the way I was? Or maybe you did perform the way you were supposed to, and it was just something, maybe you had a bad day, things weren't feeling the way they wanted to, but you could still have the output that you wanted to as well. Right? You don't want to nocebo yourself into missing out on some progress. The outside, or you're having a great day, so you want to go a little bit heavier. I'm always hesitant about that one, because there's some lifters that never have bad days. And they always, they're like, I'm feeling great today, I'm going to go up. And then they completely shit the bed, right? So it's putting in controls that allow them to make educated decisions that kind of take care of the auto regulation for themselves. And that's why I am a big fan of RPE. And there are plenty of ways to teach people how to implement that properly, like assigning a percentage range and an RPE to give them an idea of where they should be around. There are a ton of tables that have RPE for number of reps at a given percentage. These are all tremendous tools, but at the end of the day, that number out of 10 is probably the best control you can use, as long as the number of sets stays static. The one thing I do look at is, how does the intra-session volume distribution impact the amount of recovery that we have available? So say we do a session that only has 3 heavy sets of your main barbell movement, and then we have a session that has 5 heavy sets of a main barbell movement. Well, that's going to dictate how much volume or how many number of sets we can tolerate on the assistance work. To me, that's the most important thing to hammer out, because as soon as you attach an RPE to that sort of system, all the auto regulation takes care of itself. Right? So I wouldn't necessarily look at statistics or objective metrics. If you do use those things, they should be after the fact and kind of as a retroactive look to address how successful the model you're using is for that individual.
Any follow-ups, Justin, or is that good? All right. Yeah. So I think too, right, with the idea of gauging volume, and you don't like, so if you assign someone RPEs, right, and they feel good that day, if they're able to stay within that RPE paradigm and not overshoot, then I think that allowing that person to continue to pursue that is always going to be a good thing. If they do overshoot, right, it's our job as coaches to not necessarily tell them they're never allowed to do it again because they made a fatal mistake. But it's our job as coaches to communicate to them, hey, why did you make this jump? Why did you think this was the appropriate jump? Could you not look at the videos like, what are you basing your RPE off of? If they're like, I just base it off of how I feel, then you're like, okay, well, your subjective feeling of how that weight is moving isn't necessarily the key thing right now that you're able to make a good judgment on. So let's add in video recording of that set as well, right? So then you can video record your sets, say how it feels, and then add those two together so that we have two variables now that are judging how hard it was, right? But then if you have a person who is just someone that undershoots, right, then you want to be able to push them a little bit further as well. So there's always a communication piece that has to be brought into talking about RPEs and subjective rate of exertions. And much like if you're doing research on fat loss, right? If you have multiple compartment models to dictate how much fat you lost, is going to be far better. So say you did a skin caliper and you did an MRI and you did a DEXA scan. That's a 3-compartment model that's going to allow you to really look at how much body fat that person has lost, as opposed to if you just did a skin caliper, right? Skin caliper will get you in a ballpark, but those 3 things together are going to get you a more precise answer. So that's all you want to do when you're giving somebody subjective data to go off of, is trying to get as many things that they can rely on to give them better answers to the questions, right? Of, is this a single? Is this a double RPE 8 or 9? And then when it comes to percentages, and why I'm not a huge fan of percentages is because once you give people their percentages, right, and say they're doing 80% for 5, and that 5 feels heavy, they're automatically going to assume they got weaker. And not only are they going to be training at a higher rate of perceived exertion, right? That maybe you want them to do it when they're fully recovered, 80% for 5 is like a RP 7 or 8. Maybe that day it's a 9 or 10. Now, because you're using volume to continue to gauge their progress, they're not going to be able to auto-regulate as well, right? Because if they're doing 80% for a set of 5, maybe the next progression is 85% for a set of 3, right? But they've already built themselves a really big hole. So now they're continuing to pile on that fatigue and all that extra accumulation. So then you have to deload them more often, right? So that's why I think being able to create some autonomy with RPEs, reps and reserves, even velocity-based training, if they get really good at it, is going to be far better in order for them to make progress as a lifter than percentage-based training.
Agreed.
All right. So unless you guys have any other questions, that is it for today. Appreciate you guys coming on for any questions, and always thankful that you guys stay in tune with everything, even with Paul being the meanest Canadian ever.
Hey man, I'm just trying to buck the trend.
It's not a good trend to buck.
Yeah, it's true. We're
You're
so polite, we let our government run our show. You're
better than that. So any closing words on programming or periodization, Paul?
I think if people take away anything from our 3-week dive into this, or 4-week now, is there is nothing that should be set in stone. There is no hard, fast rules for anything, as long as you have a general, I would say general, but a deep understanding of the general principles, and you can confidently say why you programmed something in the way that you did and the amount that you did, and you know how to modify things based on what your communication with your athlete is, right? Having a flexible approach is what's going to make you a better coach and a coach that's more prepared to deal with things that athletes will run into. Like, no two people respond the same to anything that you prescribe them, so you should know how to modify it accordingly.
Yeah, and if that doesn't make sense to you guys when what Paul just said, then I would highly recommend doing some research into biology and really trying to understand how complex the human body is, and understanding that you can't predict the model that's going to work best for someone. That's why when people have like, oh, this is my style of programming and this is what I do for everyone. And it's like, oh, so you're predicting that each person you're going to get from week 1 to week 4 is going to respond exactly the same. And that's why your percentages and all that stuff is the exact same, right?
Mhm.
You just always want to understand that biology, psycho-emotional stress, all that stuff plays a huge role in that person's ability, even morphological considerations, right? If that person cannot squat properly because their morphology is shit, their squat volume is gonna have to be reduced, and you're gonna have to be very creative in your way to get their squat a lot stronger. So thinking outside of the box and not such in binary terms, I think is the key point for this for sure. And then so next deep dive we're going to go into is how we get strong, right? The components of strength and all those things. And we're going to try to get on. I've reached out to Mike T. Mike T is going to be coming on to talk about his ideas and hopefully a couple more people to talk about it as well. But really breaking down the chemistry of it, the makeup of how we get stronger, and then with another Q&A like we did this time. So if you guys are interested in that, come along every Sunday, 4 p.m. It's live podcasting, myself and Paul, and most of the members of Coach's Corner University. Not a lot of new faces, which is fine. That's fine. But invite your friends, guys. Don't worry about it.
Yep. Invite your friends. Give them the link.
What'd you say, Paul?
I said give them the link.
Yes, give them the link. Raise your hand when I'm talking if you're going to interrupt me, please. I said please at the end, so it was very nice. I said please. So if you guys like the show, please go to Coach's Corner and on iTunes and leave a review and a 5-star rating. It is greatly appreciated. And thanks as always for listening to the podcast and asking such great questions, guys. We're very thankful for that.